I remember exactly where I was standing when the guidance counselor said it. It was in the cramped office at Riverside High School, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, motivational posters peeling at the corners. My daughter Sofia sat beside me in a plastic chair that was too small for her 17-year-old frame, her hands folded neatly in her lap the way I'd taught her since she was little. Mrs. Patterson, with her wire-rimmed glasses and permanent frown, shuffled through Sofia's transcript like she was handling contaminated evidence. And then she said the words that would haunt me for months, words that made my blood pressure spike and my fists clench involuntarily. But what Mrs. Patterson didn't know, what none of them at that school knew, was that my daughter was about to prove every single one of them spectacularly wrong. And it would happen in the most beautiful, devastating way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Senior year college planning, they called it. A chance to discuss Sofia's future, her options, her potential paths forward. I'd taken the afternoon off from my job at the medical billing company, something I rarely did because every hour away from work meant less money for our already tight budget. But this was important. This was about my daughter's future, and nothing mattered more than that. Sofia had been nervous all morning, changing her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple blue sweater and dark jeans. She always did that. When she was anxious, this careful consideration of how she presented herself to the world. As if the right clothes could somehow make people see her differently, see her worth. We'd talked about this meeting for weeks, about what colleges she might want to apply to, what she might want to study. She'd been researching schools obsessively, printing out pages from college websites and leaving them scattered across her desk like breadcrumbs leading to her future. Mrs. Patterson had been Sofia's guidance counselor for 3 years, and in all that time, I'd never once felt like she truly saw my daughter. She saw statistics, test scores, demographic categories. She saw a Latina girl from the east side of town whose mother cleaned houses before switching to medical billing, whose father wasn't in the picture, whose zip code automatically lowered expectations. She never saw the brilliant, curious, determined young woman who stayed up until midnight, reading everything from classic literature to quantum physics articles, who taught herself Spanish and French through library books and YouTube videos, who volunteered at the community center tutoring younger kids in math and science. The office smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. Mrs. Patterson's desk was covered with college brochures, but I noticed they were mostly for community colleges and local state schools. Nothing wrong with those institutions, of course. But I knew Sofia's dreams reached far beyond the geographical limitations of our small Illinois town. She'd been talking about Harvard since she was 13, ever since she'd read a biography of a Supreme Court justice who'd graduated from there. It wasn't about prestige for her. It was about possibility, about being in a place where her hunger for knowledge would be fed rather than dismissed. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat and launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech. She talked about being realistic, about understanding limitations, about the importance of having backup plans. She mentioned Sofia's grades, which were excellent, but immediately followed up with concerns about standardized test scores, extracurricular activities, and something she called institutional fit. Every positive thing she said about my daughter came with a qualifier, a but, however. Sofia sat perfectly still beside me, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she pressed her lips together when she was trying not to cry. This was my child who had never received anything less than an A in any class, who had devoured every book in our local library's science section, who had won the state science fair 2 years running with projects that impressed judges twice. Her age. This was the girl who had taught herself calculus during summer break because she was bored with the math offerings at school, who had started a coding club that had grown from 3 members to 30 in just 1 semester. And then Mrs. Patterson said it, The sentence that would replay in my mind during every sleepless night for the next several months. She leaned back in her chair, removed her glasses to clean them with deliberate slowness, and looked at Sofia with what I can only describe as condescending pity. "Sofia, honey, I think you need to be more realistic about your college expectations. Schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they're just not for girls like you. You're smart, don't get me wrong, but these institutions are looking for a very specific type of student. Students with advantages you simply don't have. I'm concerned that you're setting yourself up for disappointment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Girls like you. What did that mean exactly? Girls who were Latina? Girls whose mothers worked multiple jobs to make ends meet? Girls who shopped at thrift stores and bought their school supplies at dollar stores? Girls who had dreams bigger than the narrow boxes other people tried to put them in? I watched my daughter's face crumble, just slightly, just enough for me to notice. Her eyes dropped to her hands, and I saw that slight tremor in her chin that meant she was fighting back tears. In that moment, I wanted to reach across the desk and shake Mrs. Patterson until her glasses fell off. I wanted to scream about all the ways she was wrong, about all the things she didn't know about my daughter. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen by the authority of the situation, by the institutional power this woman held over my child's future. Sofia's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "But my grades are good, and I've been studying really hard for the SATs. I'm retaking them next month." Mrs. Patterson's smile was the kind adults give children when they're being naive. "Grades are important, sweetie, but these schools consider so much more. Leadership positions, expensive test prep courses, summer programs that cost thousands of dollars, connections, legacy admissions. It's not just about being smart anymore. It's about having resources and, frankly, about fitting a certain profile." She turned to me then, and her tone became more businesslike, more direct. "Mrs. Hernandez, I'm sure you want what's best for Sofia, but applying to these reach schools isn't just expensive. It's setting her up for rejection that could really damage her self-confidence. She could have a wonderful future at our state school. They have a good business program, and with her grades, she might even qualify for some financial aid." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Business program. As if my daughter, who spent her free time reading about genetic engineering and climate change solutions, who had built a computer from scratch with parts she'd saved up to buy, who dreamed of studying international relations and someday working for the United Nations, would be satisfied with a basic business degree at a school she could commute to from home. I found my voice then, though it came out smaller than I'd intended. Sofia has always been an exceptional student. She's never been challenged enough in her classes here. Maybe she needs a more rigorous academic environment. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like annoyance. "Mrs. Hernandez, I understand you're proud of your daughter, but there's a difference between being a big fish in a small pond and being able to compete at the highest levels. Sofia is a wonderful girl, but Harvard accepts less than 4% of applicants. They're looking for students who will change the world, who have already demonstrated exceptional leadership and achievement." She gestured toward Sofia's transcript. Again. "Sofia is a good student, maybe even a very good student for our school. But good isn't exceptional. Good isn't Harvard material." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear voices in the hallway, could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Sofia was staring at her hands, and I knew she was memorizing this moment, filing it away with all the other times adults had told her to aim lower, dream smaller, be more realistic. Mrs. Patterson continued, softer now, but no less devastating. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can usually tell which students have what it takes for the top-tier schools. Sofia is bright, absolutely, but she lacks that special something, that spark that elite admissions committees are looking for. She's more of a solid, dependable student than a standout star. I thought about all the nights Sofia had fallen asleep at her desk, textbook open, highlighter still in her hand. I thought about how she'd taught herself programming languages during lunch breaks, how she'd organized a fundraiser that raised $3,000 for new library books, how she'd spent her summers not at expensive camps but volunteering, at the children's hospital, reading to kids going through chemotherapy. I thought about the essay she'd written about growing up bilingual that had made her English teacher cry, about the science project on water purification that had caught the attention of a professor at the state university. But I also thought about how tired I was from working 2 jobs, how overwhelming the college application process seemed, how much I didn't know about navigating elite institutions. Maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe I was being naive, pushing my daughter toward something that wasn't meant for people like us. Maybe it was better to be safe, to choose the path of least resistance, to protect Sofia from the kind of rejection that could crush her spirit. Sofia finally looked up, and when she met my eyes, I saw something there that broke my heart. It wasn't just disappointment. It was resignation. It was the look of someone who was learning to make herself smaller, to accept limitations that other people placed on her dreams. "Maybe Mrs. Patterson is right, Mom," she said quietly. "Maybe I should be more realistic." And in that moment, sitting in that sterile office under those buzzing fluorescent lights, I realized I had failed my daughter. Not academically, not financially, but in the most fundamental way possible. I had let someone else's limited vision of her potential become the ceiling of her aspirations. I had sat silently while an adult in authority dismissed her dreams as unrealistic, her ambitions as naive. But what Mrs. Patterson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my daughter had something that couldn't be measured by test scores or quantified by extracurricular activities. She had fire. She had determination. She had the kind of quiet strength that comes from being underestimated your entire life and still refusing to give up on yourself. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises to keep in touch about Sofia's college applications. Mrs. Patterson handed us a stack of brochures for local colleges and community colleges, along with information about financial aid and student loans. She walked us to the door with that same condescending smile, telling Sofia to keep up the good work and to remember that there are many paths to success. As we walked through the hallway toward the exit, past displays of student achievements and college pennants from schools Mrs. Patterson thought were more appropriate for students like Sofia, I made a silent promise. I promised myself that I would never again let someone else's limitations become my daughter's reality. I promised that I would find a way to support her dreams, even if I didn't know how yet. I promised that the next time someone told my daughter she wasn't good enough, smart enough, special enough, I would be ready with proof that they were wrong. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined in that moment of defeat and frustration, was that Sofia had made a promise too. Promise to herself that would change everything. A promise that would turn Mrs. Patterson's words into fuel for a fire that would burn bright enough to light up the darkest moments of doubt that lay ahead. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Sofia stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, at the small houses with chain-link fences and cars that had seen better days. I wanted to say something encouraging, something that would undo the damage of the last hour, but every word that came to mind felt inadequate. "Mom," Sofia said finally, her voice steady in a way that surprised me. "Do you think she's right?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, stopped at a red light, and turned to look at my daughter. Really look at her. I saw the intelligent brown, eyes that had been asking profound questions since she could talk. I saw the determined set of her jaw that reminded me of my own mother, who had immigrated to this country with nothing but hopes and had built a life through sheer force of will. I saw the young woman who stayed up late helping her younger cousin with homework, who had learned to change the oil in our car because we couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it, who had never once complained about wearing secondhand clothes or eating generic cereal. "No, mija," I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in that office. "I don't think she's right at all. I think she doesn't know you, and I think that's her loss." Sofia nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not defeat, not resignation, but something that looked almost like determination. "Then I'm going to prove her wrong," she said simply. "I'm going to apply to Harvard, and when I get in, I'm going to bring my acceptance letter to her office and show her exactly what girls like me can do." That night marked the beginning of something I didn't fully understand at the time. Sofia disappeared into her room after dinner, and I could hear the soft clicking of her laptop keyboard until well past midnight. When I knocked on her door to tell her it was time for bed, she looked up from her screen with eyes that were bright with purpose, not fatigue. "I'm researching, Mom," she said, gesturing to the dozens of tabs open on her browser. "I'm learning everything I can about Harvard's admissions process, their values, what they're really looking for in students. Mrs. Patterson was wrong about one thing. It's not just about having money or connections. They want students who will make a difference, who have overcome challenges, who bring unique perspectives." I sat on the edge of her bed, looking at the screen filled with admissions statistics, student profiles, and application requirements. "Mija, you know I support whatever you want to do, but the application fees alone." "I already thought about that," she interrupted, pulling up another tab. "There are fee waivers for students from low-income families. And look at this. They have a program called Harvard Financial Aid Initiative. Students whose families make less than $65,000 a year attend for free. Completely free, Mom. Room, board, tuition, everything." The number hit me like a revelation. Our household income was barely $40,000, even with my second job doing weekend bookkeeping for a local restaurant. I had always assumed that elite universities were financially impossible for us, that even if Sofia could somehow get admitted, we'd never be able to afford it. But here was my daughter, 17 years old, showing me possibilities I'd never even researched. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. Sofia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I've been researching it for months, actually, since sophomore year. I didn't want to get your hopes up if it turned out I wasn't smart enough to get in." That phrase, "smart enough," echoed Mrs. Patterson's words from earlier that day, and I felt a familiar surge of anger. But looking at my daughter, surrounded by printouts and notebooks filled with her careful handwriting, I realized that Sofia had been quietly building toward this goal for years, while I'd been focused on just getting through each day. Over the next few weeks, I began to see Sofia with new eyes. I started paying attention to things I'd somehow missed in the chaos of working multiple jobs and managing our household. Like how she woke up every morning at 5:30 to study, before school, claiming she was more focused in the early hours when the house was quiet. Like how she had systematically worked her way through every college-level textbook in our public library's reference section, teaching herself advanced chemistry and physics concepts that weren't offered at her high school. I discovered that she had been corresponding with professors at various universities, asking thoughtful questions about their research, and sometimes offering insights that surprised them. One professor from Northwestern had even invited her to attend a virtual lecture series on environmental policy, telling her that her questions demonstrated graduate-level thinking. Another researcher from the University of Chicago had cited one of Sofia's observations in a paper about urban water systems after she had reached out to him following a TED Talk she'd watched online. But perhaps most remarkably, I learned about the tutoring program Sofia had created at the community center. What I had thought was casual volunteering was actually a structured educational initiative she had designed and implemented entirely on her own. She had identified elementary school students who were struggling with math and science, developed individualized learning plans for each child, and tracked their progress with the kind of detailed record-keeping that would have impressed professional educators. Maria Santos, the community center director, called me one evening to tell me about Sofia's impact. "Mrs. Hernandez, I hope you know what an extraordinary daughter you have. These kids she's been working with, some of them have improved their math scores by 2 grade levels in just 6 months. But more than that, she's changed how they see themselves. They come in here excited about learning, talking about wanting to be scientists and engineers. Sofia has given them something precious, the belief that they're capable of great things." I thought about Mrs. Patterson's words about Sofia lacking that special something, and I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Here was my daughter, quietly transforming the lives of struggling students, conducting original research, engaging with university professors, and pursuing knowledge with a passion that had nothing to do with grades or recognition. How had I missed seeing the full scope of her brilliance? The answer, I realized, was that Sofia had learned early to hide her light. In a school system that often treated students from our neighborhood as statistics rather than individuals, she had discovered that standing out too much could invite unwanted attention or skepticism. She had learned to be quietly excellent, to pursue her interests without fanfare, to dream big while speaking small. But I also began to understand the weight she had been carrying. One evening, I found her crying over her laptop, frustrated by an advanced calculus problem she was trying to solve using free online resources. When I asked what was wrong, she broke down completely. "Everyone else applying to these schools has private tutors and test prep courses that cost thousands of dollars," she sobbed. "They go to expensive summer programs at actual universities. They have parents who went to Harvard or Yale and can help them navigate the system. I'm trying to learn everything from YouTube videos and library books, and sometimes I feel so far behind." In that moment, I saw clearly the additional burden my daughter carried. Not just the pressure to excel academically, but the pressure to do it without the resources that most of her potential competitors took for granted. She wasn't just competing against other smart teenagers. She was competing against generational wealth, social capital, and educational advantages that had been accumulating in some families for decades. That night, I made a decision that would stretch our already tight budget, but felt absolutely necessary. I researched every free and low-cost resource I could find to support Sofia's preparation. I found online SAT prep courses offered through our public library system. I discovered that the local university allowed high school students to audit certain lectures for free. I reached out to Hispanic professional organizations and found mentorship programs that paired college-bound students with successful graduates. Most importantly, I decided to become Sofia's advocate in a way I had never been before. I scheduled meetings with her teachers to discuss additional academic opportunities. I contacted the principal to ask why the school didn't offer more advanced placement courses. I even reached out to parents of other high-achieving students to form an informal study group where kids could challenge each other academically. The transformation in Sofia was remarkable to witness. As she began to see that I believed in her dreams as much as she did, her confidence grew. She started speaking up more in class, asking questions that pushed beyond the standard curriculum. She joined the debate team and quickly became their strongest performer, arguing complex policy positions with a sophistication that impressed judges and competitors alike. But it was her work on the science fair project that truly opened my eyes to what Sofia was capable of when given the freedom to pursue her interests fully. She had chosen to investigate water contamination in our own neighborhood, a problem that had affected several families we knew, but that local authorities had largely ignored. Sofia spent months collecting water samples, teaching herself advanced chemistry techniques, and corresponding with environmental scientists about her methodology. She discovered that contamination levels in certain areas exceeded federal safety standards, and her research caught the attention of a local news station. When they interviewed her for a segment about environmental justice, she spoke with the poise and knowledge of someone twice her age. "The thing people don't understand," she told the reporter, is that environmental problems disproportionately affect low-income communities because we don't have the political power to demand better. But we have the intelligence and the dedication to find solutions if we're given the opportunity to learn and grow. Watching my daughter on television, speaking passionately about issues that mattered to our community while demonstrating the kind of critical thinking and social awareness that colleges claim to value, I felt a fierce pride mixed with regret. How had I ever doubted that she belonged in the most challenging academic environments? How had I let Mrs. Patterson's limited vision influence even a moment of uncertainty about Sofia's potential? The science fair project went on to win first place at the regional competition and third place at the state level. But more importantly, it led to Sofia being invited to present her research at a conference on environmental justice, hosted by a consortium of Midwest universities. She was the only high school student among presenters who were mostly graduate students and professional researchers. As Sofia prepared for her presentation, I watched her practice in our living room, gesturing confidently as she explained complex scientific concepts in language that was both precise and accessible. She had created slides that were visually compelling and intellectually rigorous, and her passion for the subject was evident in every word. "Mom," she said during one of these practice sessions, "do you think Mrs. Patterson would understand what I'm talking about if she were in the audience?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it revealed how much Sofia had grown in the months since that devastating guidance counselor meeting. She wasn't asking because she doubted her own abilities, or because she wanted validation from someone who had dismissed her. She was asking because she had reached a level of intellectual sophistication that made Mrs. Patterson's assessment seem not just wrong, but irrelevant. "I think," I said carefully, "that Mrs. Patterson measures intelligence in very narrow ways, and I think she would be completely unprepared for what you've become." Sofia nodded thoughtfully. I used to be angry about what she said, but now I'm almost grateful, because it made me realize that I couldn't wait for other people to recognize my potential. I had to prove it to myself first. The conference presentation was a triumph. Sofia fielded questions from environmental scientists and policy researchers with confidence and insight. Several attendees approached her afterward to discuss her work further, and one professor from the University of Chicago invited her to visit his lab if she was ever in the area. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a Harvard professor who had been in the audience, introduced herself to Sofia after the presentation. Dr. Rodriguez had grown up in similar circumstances to ours. Daughter of immigrants, first in her family to attend college, educated in underfunded public schools. She had gone on to become a leading researcher in environmental policy and one of Harvard's most respected faculty members. "Your work reminds me of myself at your age," Dr. Rodriguez told Sofia. "Not just the scientific rigor, but the way you connect research to community impact. That's the kind of thinking that changes the world." She handed Sofia her business card and said something that made my heart soar. "When you apply to Harvard, and I hope you will, please feel free to mention our conversation. I'd be happy to discuss your research interests further." Driving. Home from the conference, Sofia was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Mom, I think I understand something now. Mrs. Patterson wasn't really talking about my intelligence when she said I wasn't Harvard material. She was talking about her own limitations, her own inability to imagine someone like me in a place like that." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this young woman who had grown so much in such a short time. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when people say you can't do something, sometimes they're really saying that they can't imagine doing it themselves. Mrs. Patterson has probably never been anywhere like Harvard. She's probably never met anyone like Dr. Rodriguez. So when she looks at me, she can't picture me there because she can't picture anyone from our community there." The insight was profound and heartbreaking and empowering all at once. "Sofia," had not only intellectually surpassed the expectations that had been placed on her, but she had developed the emotional intelligence to understand the psychology of those limitations. She was learning to see herself clearly, independent of other people's ability or inability to recognize her worth. That night, as I watched Sofia work on her Harvard application essay, I marveled at the journey we had both taken since that day in Mrs. Patterson's office. Sofia had spent months proving to herself that she belonged among the best students in the country. And I had learned to see my daughter not just as my beloved child, but as an extraordinary young woman whose potential was limitless. The essay she was writing wasn't about overcoming poverty or discrimination, though those experiences had certainly shaped her. Instead, she was writing about water as a metaphor for resilience, how it finds a way through any obstacle, how it shapes landscapes over time, how it's essential for all life but often taken for granted until it's threatened. Reading over her shoulder, I realized that Sofia had found a way to tell her story that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. "Are you nervous about submitting the application?" I asked her. Sofia looked up from her laptop and her smile was radiant with confidence. "No, Mom. For the first time in my life, I'm not nervous about people judging whether I'm good enough. Because I know who I am now. I know what I'm capable of. Whether Harvard says yes or no, I'm all ready." Enough. The notification came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, just as Harvard had promised. Sofia was at the community center, leading a study session for her middle school students, when her phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. I was at work, processing insurance claims in the sterile quiet of my office, when my own phone lit up with a text message that made my hands shake so violently I could barely read the screen. "Mom, I need you to come to the community center, right now. Don't ask questions. Just come." The drive across town felt like it took hours, though I knew it was only 12 minutes. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every turn seemed to take me further from answers, rather than closer to them. Sofia's text had given me no indication of what to expect. Was she hurt? Had something gone wrong with the tutoring program? Had there been bad news from colleges that had crushed her spirit? When I arrived at the community center, I found Sofia sitting in the main room with 8 middle school students gathered around her. Her laptop was open on the table, and everyone was staring at the screen with expressions I couldn't quite read. The room was absolutely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "Sofia?" I called out, my voice echoing in the large space. She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that took my breath away. Not tears, not disappointment, but a kind of shocked wonder that made her seem younger and older simultaneously. She stood slowly, as if moving through water, and walked toward me with deliberate steps. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with emotion I couldn't identify. "I got in." The words didn't register immediately. I heard them, but they seemed to float in the air between us, refusing to settle into meaning. "Got in? Where, mija?" Sofia's smile started small and grew until it transformed her entire face. "Harvard, Mom. I got into Harvard." The room erupted. The middle school students, who had been holding their breath waiting for this moment, burst into cheers and applause. Maria Santos emerged from her office, beaming with pride. Other community center staff materialized from various rooms, drawn by the celebration. But for me, the world had gone completely silent. Harvard. My daughter, my brilliant, underestimated, magnificent daughter, had been accepted to Harvard University. I must have staggered backward because suddenly Sofia was next to me, her arm around my waist, steadying me. "Are you okay, Mom? Do you need to sit down?" I couldn't speak. Months of preparation, years of doubt, decades of being told that people like us didn't belong in places like that. All of it collided in my chest and refused to become words. I just nodded and let Sofia guide me to a chair. "Show me," I finally managed to whisper. Sofia pulled up the email on her laptop, and there it was, in the official font and formatting of Harvard University's admissions office. "Dear Sofia, congratulations. It is with great pleasure that I inform you that you have been admitted to Harvard College's class of 2029. The letter went on to detail financial aid information, next steps, and welcome messages. But I couldn't focus on the words. All I could see was that single, impossible, beautiful sentence. "You have been admitted to Harvard College." "There's more," Sofia said, scrolling down to show me the financial aid package. "Full scholarship, Mom. Full ride, room, board, tuition, books, everything. We won't pay a single dollar for me to attend Harvard University." One of her tutoring students, a shy 8th grader named Carmen who had struggled with math anxiety before Sofia began working with her, spoke up from across the room. "Miss Sofia, does this mean you're going to be a Harvard student? Like, for real?" Sofia looked at Carmen with the same gentle attention she gave all her students. "Yes, Carmen. For real. And you know what this means for you?" Carmen shook her head, eyes wide. "It means that when people tell you that kids from our neighborhood can't achieve their biggest dreams, you can point to me and tell them they're wrong. It means you have proof that being smart and working hard and believing in yourself is enough, no matter where you come from." The wisdom in that response, the way Sofia immediately transformed her personal triumph into encouragement for others, reminded me why she deserved this opportunity. This wasn't just about her academic achievements or test scores. This was about character, about the kind of person who would use her success to lift others rather than distance herself from her origins. As the celebration continued around us, Sofia pulled me aside to a quieter corner of the room. "Mom, there's something else. Something I need to tell you about tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Sofia's expression became more serious, though the joy never left her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson called the school this morning. She heard that decisions were coming out today, and she wanted to schedule a meeting with any students who received significant college acceptances, for publicity purposes. The principal asked if I would meet with her tomorrow afternoon to discuss my achievement journey for the school newsletter." The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Mrs. Patterson, who had told my daughter 9 months ago that Harvard was not for girls like her, now wanted to claim credit for Sofia's success in a school newsletter. The woman who had tried to redirect Sofia toward community college and business programs now wanted to associate herself with a Harvard acceptance. "What did you tell them?" I asked. Sofia's smile took on a quality I had never seen before, not vindictive, but absolutely self-assured. "I told them I'd be happy to meet with Mrs. Patterson. I think it's time we had another conversation." That evening, Sofia and I sat at our kitchen table with Chinese takeout from the restaurant where I did weekend bookkeeping, celebrating with the most expensive meal we could justify. Sofia had printed out her acceptance letter and laid it next to her laptop, where she was already exploring course catalogs and professor profiles. "I can't believe this is real," she said, touching the Harvard letterhead as if it might disappear. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real, mija. You earned this. Every late night studying, every extra project, every time you chose to work harder instead of accepting limitations. It all led to this moment." Sofia nodded, but I could see she was thinking about something deeper. "Mom, do you think Mrs. Patterson really believes that students like me can't succeed at places like Harvard? Or do you think she just never saw it happen before, so she assumed it was impossible?" The question revealed Sofia's growing understanding of how systemic barriers work, how individual prejudices often masquerade as institutional wisdom. "I think," I said carefully, "that Mrs. Patterson has probably spent her career watching students like you be told to aim lower, and she started believing that was helping them avoid disappointment. But what she never understood is that the disappointment comes from not trying, not from trying and failing." Tomorrow is going to be interesting, Sofia said with a smile that reminded me of her grandmother, my mother, who had always said that the best revenge was living well and proving doubters wrong through success rather than anger. The next afternoon, I took time off work to accompany Sofia to her meeting with Mrs. Patterson. This wasn't about my need to witness Sofia's vindication. It was about ensuring that my daughter had support as she navigated what could be an awkward or even hostile conversation. I had learned over the past year that being Sofia's advocate meant showing up, not just believing from a distance. Mrs. Patterson's office looked exactly the same as it had 9 months earlier. The same motivational posters, the same fluorescent lighting, the same cluttered desk covered with college brochures. But everything else had changed. Sofia entered the room with confidence that transformed the entire dynamic. She wasn't seeking approval or permission. She was graciously granting an audience. "Sofia," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice artificially bright. "Congratulations on your college acceptances. I understand you've had some very positive news." "Thank you," Sofia replied politely. "Yes, I've been fortunate to receive acceptances from several excellent institutions." Mrs. Patterson consulted a paper on her desk. "I see here that you were accepted to Northwestern University of Chicago and several other fine schools. Those are wonderful achievements. The school newsletter would love to feature your success story. You know, local student overcomes challenges, that sort of thing." Sofia's expression remained pleasant, but I caught the slight pause before she responded. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, there's one acceptance you don't have on your list." "Oh? Which school is that?" Sofia reached into her backpack and withdrew a folder. With deliberate care, she removed her Harvard acceptance letter and placed it on Mrs. Patterson's desk, the university letterhead clearly visible. "Harvard University offered me admission with a full scholarship," Sofia said calmly. "I wanted you to see the letter personally." The change in Mrs. Patterson's expression was instant and complete. The artificial brightness disappeared, replaced by genuine shock that she couldn't hide behind professional pleasantries. She picked up the letter with trembling hands, reading it twice before looking back at Sofia. "Harvard," she repeated, as if testing whether the word would sound different coming from her own mouth. "You were accepted to Harvard University." "Yes," Sofia confirmed, "with full financial aid, as I mentioned." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Mrs. Patterson seemed to be processing not just the information, but the implications of what Sofia's acceptance meant about her own judgment, her own limitations, her own role in either supporting or hindering student dreams. "Sofia," she finally said, her voice much quieter than it had been moments before, "I owe you an apology. A significant apology." Sofia nodded gracefully. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Patterson." "No, you don't understand. I need to explain something to you." Mrs. Patterson removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes, looking suddenly much older than I remembered. "In 20 years of counseling students, I've never had a student from this school get accepted to Harvard. Not one. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that meant it was impossible, rather than recognizing that maybe I wasn't doing enough to help students reach that level." She looked directly at Sofia, and I saw something in her expression that looked like genuine remorse. "When I told you to be more realistic about your college expectations, I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. But what I was really doing was protecting myself from having to acknowledge that I had been setting my expectations too low for too long." Sofia listened with the same patient attention she brought to tutoring sessions with struggling students. "Mrs. Patterson, what do you think would need to change for more students to have opportunities like this?" The question was brilliant in its generosity. Rather than demanding further apologies or explanations, Sofia was redirecting the conversation towards solutions and improvements. She was giving Mrs. Patterson a chance to transform this moment of professional embarrassment into a learning opportunity. Mrs. Patterson considered the question seriously. Honestly, I think I need to fundamentally change how I approach advising students from backgrounds like yours. I need to stop assuming that financial limitations mean academic limitations. I need to research opportunities I've never thought to explore. And I need to start asking students about their dreams instead of telling them what I think is realistic. That sounds like a good start, Sofia agreed. And maybe you could connect current students with graduates who have gone on to competitive universities. Sometimes students need to see examples of people who've walked the path they want to follow. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson made one more request. Sofia, I know this might be awkward, but would you be willing to speak guide to our current juniors about the college application process, not for the newsletter, but just to share your experience with students who might benefit from hearing your story? Sofia agreed immediately, and I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter turn her moment of vindication into an opportunity to help others. This was who she had always been, even when others couldn't see it. Someone who used her strength to lift others up rather than to prove points or settle scores. Walking back to the car, Sofia was unusually quiet. Finally, I asked how she was feeling about the conversation. Honestly, she said, unlocking the passenger door, I felt sorry for her. Not in a condescending way, but genuinely sorry. She's spent 20 years thinking she was helping students by limiting their aspirations. That must be a terrible thing to realize about yourself. The empathy in Sofia's response reminded me that her acceptance to Harvard wasn't just about academic achievement. It was about character, about the kind of person who could face someone who had doubted her and respond with understanding rather than triumph. That evening, Sofia called Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the Harvard professor she had met at the Environmental Justice Conference, to share the news of her acceptance. Their conversation lasted over an hour, and I listened from the kitchen as Sofia discussed her course planning, research interests, and academic goals with the same sophistication she had brought to every intellectual challenge. Dr. Rodriguez wants me to consider joining her research lab during my sophomore year, Sofia told me after hanging up. She's working on projects that align perfectly with my interests in environmental policy and social justice. As we sat together that night, reviewing Harvard's orientation materials and course catalogs, I marveled at how far we had both traveled since that devastating day in Mrs. Patterson's office. Sofia had not just proven her academic worthiness. She had discovered her own voice and learned to use it powerfully. And I had learned to see my daughter clearly, to believe in her dreams as fiercely as she did. The acceptance letter would change Sofia's life in ways we were only beginning to understand. But the journey to that letter had already transformed both of us in ways that mattered just as much. Sofia had learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it, and I had learned that the most important thing a parent can do is believe in their child's potential, even when the rest of the world seems determined to diminish it. Tomorrow, Sofia would begin preparing for Harvard. But tonight, we celebrated not just her acceptance, but her courage to dream beyond the limitations others had tried to place on her life. The weeks following Sofia's Harvard acceptance transformed our small town in ways I never could have anticipated. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and suddenly everyone wanted to share in Sofia's achievement. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Student Breaks Barriers with Harvard Acceptance," complete with a photo of Sofia holding her acceptance letter in front of the community center where she had been tutoring students for years. But the most meaningful response came from the students Sofia had been working with. Carmen, the 8th grader who had struggled with math anxiety, approached Sofia after a tutoring session with tears in her eyes. "Miss Sofia," she said, "my mom has been crying happy tears for 3 days. She says that if you can get into Harvard, then maybe I can get into college too someday." This comment sparked something in Sofia that I hadn't expected. Rather than simply basking in her personal achievement, she became even more determined to use her success as a platform for helping other students see possibilities they had never considered. She began developing what she called the Pathway Project, a comprehensive mentoring program designed to support high-achieving students from underserved communities as they navigated the college application process. The project started small, with Sofia offering weekly workshops at the community center covering everything from standardized test preparation to essay writing to financial aid navigation. But as word spread, the program expanded rapidly. Local businesses began offering financial support. The community college provided meeting spaces. Most remarkably, alumni from competitive universities who had grown up in similar circumstances began volunteering their time to serve as mentors and advisors. Dr. Rodriguez from Harvard, who had stayed in touch with Sofia throughout the application process, connected her with other professors and graduate students who were willing to provide virtual mentoring sessions. Soon, Sofia was coordinating a network of supporters that stretched from our small Illinois town to prestigious universities across the country. Watching Sofia manage this growing initiative while maintaining her academic excellence and preparing for her own transition to college, I was struck by her natural leadership abilities. She had inherited my organizational skills, but combined them with a vision and charisma that were entirely her own. She could motivate struggling students, coordinate complex logistics, and communicate with university professors with equal effectiveness. The Pathway Project caught the attention of the Regional Educational Cooperative, which invited Sofia to present her model at their annual conference on educational equity. Standing before an audience of superintendents, principals, and policymakers, Sofia spoke with the confidence of someone who had lived the challenges she was addressing. When adults tell students to be realistic about their college aspirations, she said during her presentation, they often mean well. But what they're really doing is perpetuating systemic barriers that have limited opportunities for generations. Students from underserved communities don't need lower expectations. They need better support systems, more information, and adults who believe in their potential even when they're still learning to believe in themselves. The response was overwhelming. Several school districts requested Sofia's help in developing similar programs in their communities. A state education official asked her to serve on a committee examining college readiness initiatives. Most significantly, a national foundation focused on educational equity offered to provide funding for Sofia to expand the Pathway Project during her college years. As spring progressed and graduation approached, Sofia's achievements began attracting attention beyond our immediate region. She was selected as a winner of the Coca-Cola Scholars Program, receiving a $20,000 scholarship and recognition as one of the top high school students in the country. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund named her a Gates Scholar, providing additional financial support and connecting her with a network of high-achieving Latino students nationwide. Each new recognition brought interview requests, speaking opportunities, and invitations to participate in prestigious summer programs. Sofia navigated these opportunities with grace and strategic thinking, choosing experiences that would prepare her for her academic goals while creating platforms to advocate for other students facing similar challenges. One particularly meaningful invitation came from the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, which asked Sofia to participate in a summit on college access and success. She would be one of only 20 high school students selected nationally to engage with education policymakers about barriers facing Latino students in higher education. Preparing for the summit, Sofia spent weeks researching federal education policy, analyzing data on college enrollment and completion rates, and developing specific recommendations for improving college access. Her presentation to the summit participants was both deeply personal and rigorously analytical, weaving together her own story with broader systemic insights. My guidance counselor once told me that Harvard wasn't for girls like me, Sofia told the assembled policymakers, including several members of Congress and the Secretary of Education. But the problem wasn't my ability or potential. The problem was a system that had taught even well-meaning educators to associate zip codes with limitations, to confuse socioeconomic status with intellectual capacity. She went on to outline specific policy recommendations, increased funding for college counseling in underserved schools, better training for guidance counselors on supporting first-generation college students, and expanded access to advanced coursework in schools that historically hadn't offered challenging academic opportunities. The summit organizers were so impressed with Sofia's contributions that they invited her to participate in follow-up policy discussions throughout her college career. She had become, at 18, a recognized voice in national conversations about educational equity. As graduation day approached, our high school organized what they called senior spotlight presentations, where top-performing students would share their post-graduation plans with underclassmen. Sofia's presentation was scheduled last, and by the time she took the stage, word of her Harvard acceptance had spread throughout the student body. She began her presentation not by talking about her own achievements, but by acknowledging the students and teachers who had supported her journey. She thanked Mr. Chen for refusing to accept mediocrity in his physics classes, even when students complained about the difficulty. She recognized her debate coach for pushing her to defend positions she initially disagreed with, teaching her to think critically about complex issues. Most importantly, she thanked her fellow students for creating a community where academic excellence was celebrated rather than ridiculed. Then she did something unexpected. Instead of simply announcing her Harvard acceptance, she turned the presentation into a challenge for the students in the audience. 3 years ago, she said, a guidance counselor told me I should lower my expectations because students from our school don't get into places like Harvard. She was wrong about my potential, but she was right about one thing. Students from our school historically haven't attended elite universities, not because we lack ability, but because we've lacked information, support, and examples to follow. She paused, scanning the audience of younger students who were listening with rapt attention. I'm going to Harvard University in the fall, she continued, but not so I can leave this community behind. I'm going so I can come back with knowledge, connections, and resources that will help the next generation of students from our school reach even higher. I'm going to prove that what happened to me isn't a fluke or an exception. It's a preview of what's possible when students believe in themselves and adults believe in students. The response was electric. Students who had never considered four-year universities began asking questions about application processes, financial aid, and academic preparation. Teachers who had grown accustomed to modest post-graduation ambitions found themselves researching competitive scholarship programs and reaching out to university admissions offices. Mrs. Patterson, who had attended the presentation, approached Sofia afterward with tears in her eyes. Sofia, I want you to know that you've changed how I do my job. I've already started revising how I advise students about college options. Your success has made me realize that I was part of the problem, but I'm committed to being part of the solution moving forward. Sofia graciously accepted the apology and then made an offer that surprised everyone, including me. Mrs. Patterson, the Pathway Project is going to need an adult coordinator when I leave for college. Someone who understands the school system and can work with administrators to ensure students get the support they need. Would you be interested in taking on that role? The offer was brilliant in its generosity and strategic thinking. By inviting Mrs. Patterson to become an advocate for the very opportunities she had once discouraged, Sofia was creating accountability while offering redemption. She was transforming a former obstacle into an ally. Mrs. Patterson accepted immediately, and over the following weeks, I watched her throw herself into learning about college access programs with the enthusiasm of someone trying to make amends for years of limitations. She attended training sessions on supporting first-generation college students, researched scholarship opportunities, and began reaching out to university admissions officers to build relationships that would benefit future students. Graduation day arrived with fanfare that our small town rarely experienced. Sofia had been selected as valedictorian, an honor that surprised no one who had watched her academic trajectory over the previous 4 years. Local media covered the ceremony, focusing particularly on Sofia's remarkable journey from guidance counselor doubt to Harvard acceptance. But Sofia's valedictorian speech exceeded even my highest expectations. Rather than focusing on personal achievements or offering generic advice about following dreams, she delivered a nuanced analysis of how communities can either limit or liberate their young people's potential. 4 years ago, she began, I started high school believing that success meant not disappointing the adults who were responsible for guiding my future. I thought that being a good student meant accepting the limitations that others placed on my aspirations, that questioning authority was disrespectful, that dreaming too big was setting myself up for failure. She paused, letting her words settle, over an audience that included not just families and students, but community leaders, school board members, and local politicians. But I learned something important during these 4 years. I learned that the most respectful thing you can do for adults who care about you is to exceed their expectations, not meet them. I learned that dreams aren't too big. Support systems are too small. I learned that when people tell you to be realistic, they're often asking you to accept their limitations rather than discover your own possibilities. The speech went on to challenge everyone in the audience, students, parents, educators, community members, to examine their own role in either expanding or constraining the next generation's opportunities. Sofia called for a community-wide commitment to high expectations, comprehensive support, and unwavering belief in student potential. I'm going to Harvard in the fall, she concluded, not as an exception that proves the rule, but as an example of what becomes possible when a student refuses to accept limitations and a community decides to invest in potential rather than perpetuate barriers. The question isn't whether students from our community can succeed at the highest levels. The question is whether we're brave enough to expect that they will. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but more importantly, the speech sparked conversations that continued long after graduation day. Parents began asking different questions about their children's academic futures. Teachers started researching advanced coursework options. Community leaders initiated discussions about educational investment and opportunity creation. 3 months later, as Sofia prepared to leave for Harvard, the impact of her journey had created measurable changes in our school and community. The high school had added 2 new advanced placement courses and partnered with the community college to offer dual enrollment opportunities. The Pathway Project had secured long-term funding and expanded to serve students from 3 neighboring school districts. Most significantly, the number of students applying to competitive universities had tripled, with several receiving acceptances to institutions they had never previously considered. On the day before Sofia left for Cambridge, we received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rodriguez, who was in Chicago for a conference, drove down to meet Sofia in person and see the community that had shaped her intellectual development. As we toured the community center, the high school, and the neighborhood where Sofia had grown up, Dr. Rodriguez shared insights that helped me understand the broader significance of my daughter's achievement. Sofia represents something special, she told me as we watched Sofia lead one final tutoring session with her middle school students. She's not just academically gifted, though she certainly is that. She's what we call a bridge builder, someone who uses their success to create pathways for others. These are the students who don't just succeed individually, they transform entire communities. That evening, at a farewell gathering organized by the Pathway Project participants, I watched Sofia address the students she had been mentoring. Her message was simple but powerful. Her Harvard acceptance was not an ending, but a beginning, not a personal triumph, but a community investment that would pay dividends for years to come. I'm not leaving to escape this community, she told them. I'm leaving to gather tools, knowledge, and resources that I'll bring back to expand opportunities for all of you. My success is meaningless if it doesn't create pathways for others to follow. The next morning, as we loaded Sofia's belongings into our car for the drive to Harvard, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. A year and a half earlier, My daughter had been told that Harvard wasn't for girls like her. Today, she was heading there not just as a student, but as a young woman who had already begun changing how an entire community thought about potential and possibility. The drive to Cambridge was quiet, both of us processing the magnitude of the transition ahead. When we finally arrived at Harvard Yard and began moving Sofia into her dormitory, surrounded by students from around the world, I felt a profound sense of completion and beginning simultaneously. "Mom," Sofia said as we finished organizing her room, "do you remember what Mrs. Patterson said about me lacking that special something that elite universities look for?" I nodded, the memory still vivid despite all that had happened since. "I think I finally understand what that special, something really is," she continued. "It's not about having advantages or connections or perfect test scores. It's about understanding that your success is connected to other people's opportunities. That individual achievement means nothing if it doesn't contribute to collective progress." As I hugged my daughter goodbye and prepared for the long drive home, I realized that Sofia's Harvard acceptance was just the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold for years to come. She had proven that limitation is often a failure of imagination rather than a reality of circumstance. She had shown that when one person refuses to accept barriers, they can create possibilities for entire communities. The girl who had once been told she wasn't Harvard material was now a Harvard student, but more importantly, she had become someone who would spend her life ensuring that other students never again heard that they weren't good enough, smart enough, or special enough to pursue their dreams. The story that began with a guidance counselor's dismissive comment had become a testament to the power of believing in potential, even when others cannot see it. And as I drove away from Harvard Yard that day, I knew that Sofia's real work was just beginning. Sofia's Harvard Journey. Part 6. The Multiplier Effect. 5 years after Sofia's Harvard graduation, I stood in the auditorium of the United Nations headquarters in New York City, watching my daughter address the General Assembly's Special Committee on Educational Development. At 27, Dr. Sofia Hernandez had become one of the world's leading voices on global educational equity, but the path from her small Illinois hometown to this international stage had been anything but conventional. The invitation to speak at the UN had come through Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who was now serving as UNESCO's Special Rapporteur on Educational Access. "Sofia," she had written in her invitation letter, "your work has transcended national boundaries. We need you to help world leaders understand that educational transformation isn't just about resources. It's about recognizing human potential wherever it exists." Standing at the podium with the flags of 193 nations behind her, Sofia began her presentation with a story that had become her signature opening. "7 years ago, a guidance counselor told me that Harvard University wasn't for girls like me." She meant well, but she was operating from a limited understanding of potential. Today, I want to talk about what happens when we expand that understanding globally, when we recognize that exceptional ability exists in every community, every nation, every circumstance, and when we build systems designed to develop that ability rather than overlook it. Her presentation outlined the multiplier model she had developed during her doctoral work at Stanford, a framework that showed how investing in high-potential students from underserved communities created exponential returns in terms of social and economic development. But this wasn't just theoretical research. Sofia's model was backed by data from real-world implementations across 4 continents. The most compelling case study came from her work in rural Bangladesh, where she had spent 8 months developing a program to identify and support academically gifted students in communities where higher education had been historically inaccessible. Working with local educators and international development organizations, Sofia had created a network of community-based learning centers that provided advanced academic instruction, college preparation, and mentorship for students who showed exceptional promise. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. In just 3 years, the program had produced 12 students who gained admission to competitive international universities, 47 who enrolled in prestigious programs within Bangladesh, and over 200 who became community leaders, teachers, and advocates for educational expansion in their own villages. But the real innovation of Sofia's approach wasn't just identifying and supporting individual students. It was the systematic way she trained each scholarship recipient to become a multiplier, someone who would return to their community with both enhanced skills and a commitment to expanding opportunities for the next generation. Fatima Rahman, one of the first students from Sofia's Bangladesh program, had graduated from MIT with degrees in engineering and economics. Rather than accepting lucrative job offers in developed countries, she had returned to establish Bangladesh's first rural technology institute, which was now training hundreds of young people in advanced technical skills while creating economic opportunities that kept talented individuals in their home communities. "This is what I call the multiplier effect," Sofia explained to the UN. Assembly. When we invest in exceptional students from underserved communities, we're not just changing individual lives. We're creating human catalysts who transform entire regions. Her presentation included similar success stories from programs she had established in partnership with governments and NGOs around the world. In Kenya, former scholarship recipients had created mobile learning laboratories that brought advanced STEM education to remote villages. In Peru, program alumni had developed innovative agricultural techniques that increased crop yields while providing pathways to university education for farmers' children. In the Philippines, Sofia's multipliers had established community colleges that offered international standard education at locally affordable costs. Each example demonstrated the same principle that had guided Sofia's work since her Harvard days. Exceptional potential exists everywhere, but it requires systematic support and strategic investment to flourish. More importantly, students who overcome significant barriers to achieve academic excellence often become the most effective advocates for expanding opportunities in their home communities. During the question and answer session, the ambassador from Nigeria asked Sofia about the scalability of her approach. "Dr. Hernandez, your examples are inspiring, but they represent relatively small numbers of students. How do we move from individual success stories to systemic transformation?" Sofia's response revealed the sophistication of her thinking about global development and social change. "Ambassador, that's exactly the right question, and it gets to the heart of why traditional development approaches have often failed to create lasting change. Most educational aid focuses on building infrastructure, schools, libraries, computer labs. These are important, but they don't address the fundamental issue of human capital development." She clicked to a slide showing comparative data from countries that had implemented various educational development strategies. "What our research shows is that communities with even one highly educated local leader who returns home with international experience see dramatic improvements in educational outcomes across the entire population. These multipliers don't just teach, they change expectations, advocate for policy reforms, and create new institutions." The data was compelling. Communities that had participated in Sofia's multiplier programs showed average increases of 340% in university enrollment rates, 280% in advanced course completion, and 195% in students pursuing STEM fields. More remarkably, these improvements persisted and expanded over time, as each generation of multipliers trained and supported the next. The scalability comes from understanding that sustainable change is exponential, not additive, Sofia continued. Instead of trying to directly serve every student who needs support, we identify and develop the students who will become systems changers in their own communities. It's more efficient, more sustainable, and more culturally appropriate than top-down development approaches. Her presentation concluded with an ambitious proposal: the creation of a global multiplier network that would coordinate educational excellence programs across 50 countries, with the goal of developing 10,000 multipliers over the next decade. The initiative would require unprecedented cooperation between governments, universities, and international organizations. But Sofia's track record had given her the credibility to propose solutions at this scale. After her presentation, I joined Sofia for a reception where she networked with education ministers, university presidents, and development organization leaders from around the world. Watching her navigate these conversations with confidence and expertise, I marveled at how far she had traveled from the uncertain teenager who had once worried about disappointing a small-town guidance counselor. But what struck me most was how Sofia remained fundamentally unchanged in the ways that mattered most. She still asked detailed questions about individual students' experiences. She still spoke with genuine emotion about the importance of believing in potential that others might overlook. She still saw her own success as meaningful only insofar as it created opportunities for others. During a quiet moment between conversations, Sofia pulled me aside to share news that would mark the next chapter of her journey. "Mom, I have something to tell you. I've been offered the position of Director of Global Educational Equity at the World Bank. It would mean moving to Washington, D.C. and overseeing a $2 to $3 billion portfolio of educational development programs worldwide." The magnitude of the opportunity was staggering. At 27, Sofia would become one of the youngest senior directors in World Bank history, with responsibility for educational initiatives that could impact millions of students across the developing world. It was exactly the kind of platform she had been preparing for since her Harvard days. "But there's something else," she continued. "The offer comes with a condition that I'm not sure about. They want me to focus exclusively on policy development and program oversight. No more direct work with students, no more community-based programming. They say my time is too valuable to spend on small-scale initiatives." I could see the conflict in Sofia's expression. The World Bank position would give her unprecedented influence over global educational policy, but it would also distance her from the grassroots work that had always been the source of her most innovative insights. "What does your heart tell you?" I asked. Sofia smiled, and I saw in her expression the same clarity of purpose that had guided her through every major decision since high school. "My heart tells me that the moment I stop working directly with students is the moment I lose touch with why this work matters. Policy is important, but it has to be grounded in real understanding of how change happens in individual lives and communities." 3 weeks later, Sofia announced her decision to decline the World Bank position and instead launch her own organization, the Global Multiplier Institute. Working with a consortium of universities, foundations, and development organizations, she would create the first international network specifically designed to identify, support, and coordinate exceptional students from underserved communities worldwide. The Institute's headquarters would be located in Chicago, a deliberate choice that kept Sofia connected to the Midwest communities where her journey had begun. But the organization's reach would be truly global, with regional offices in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe, each staffed by multipliers who had emerged from Sofia's earlier programs. The launch event for the Global Multiplier Institute took place at the Chicago Cultural Center, with an audience that included students, educators, and supporters from around the world. But the most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s and long retired from education, took the stage to introduce Sofia. 25 years ago, Mrs. Patterson began, her voice strong but reflective. I told a brilliant young woman that her dreams were unrealistic. I was wrong, not just about her individual potential, but about what becomes possible when we stop limiting our vision of what students can achieve. She paused, looking directly at Sofia with obvious pride and affection. Today, I want to tell every student who has ever been told to lower their expectations. Mrs. Patterson was wrong, and Dr. Sofia Hernandez is proof of what happens when someone refuses to accept other people's limitations as their own reality. Sofia's response speech that evening wove together themes that had defined her entire journey: from the importance of believing in potential that others might not see, to the responsibility that comes with achievement, to the exponential impact that occurs when individual success becomes a platform for systemic change. The institute we're launching today isn't just about creating more success stories like mine, she said. It's about creating a world where stories like mine become ordinary rather than exceptional, where every community has multiple examples of young people who pursued their highest aspirations and returned to expand opportunities for others. She gestured toward the audience, which included dozens of multipliers from her programs around the world. When we say multiplier, we mean someone who doesn't just achieve individual success, but who multiplies opportunities for others. Someone who understands that excellence is not a limited resource, but something that grows when it's shared. The evening concluded with presentations from multipliers representing 6 different countries, each sharing how their educational achievements had enabled them to transform their home communities. Their stories of schools built, programs created, policies changed, and dreams expanded demonstrated the practical impact of Sofia's vision. As I watched these remarkable young leaders describe their work, I thought about the guidance counselor's comment that had started this entire journey. Mrs. Patterson's assertion that Harvard wasn't for girls like Sofia had been proven wrong in the most spectacular way possible. But more than that, it had been transformed into motivation for ensuring that exceptional opportunities became accessible to young people whose potential might otherwise be overlooked. Later that evening, as Sofia and I walked along Lake Michigan, reflecting on the day's events and the journey that had brought us to this moment, she shared one final insight that captured the essence of her transformation. "You know, Mom, I finally understand what Mrs. Patterson meant when she said I lacked that special something that elite institutions look for. She was right. I didn't have the traditional markers of privilege that colleges had historically valued. But what she couldn't see was that overcoming barriers creates a different kind of special. It creates perspective, resilience, and most importantly, a commitment to making sure others don't face the same barriers." Sofia stopped walking and turned to face the lake, where the city lights reflected in the dark water like stars. "The special something that institutions should be looking for isn't privilege or perfection. It's potential combined with purpose. It's students who won't just benefit from opportunities, but who will multiply those opportunities for others." As we continued our walk, I realized that Sofia's story had evolved far beyond the individual triumph I had initially imagined. She had become living proof that when exceptional potential is recognized and developed, the impact extends far beyond any single life or achievement. She had demonstrated that the most meaningful success comes not from escaping the circumstances of your birth, but from transforming those circumstances for others. The girl who had once been told she wasn't Harvard material had become someone who would spend her life ensuring that potential was recognized and developed, regardless of where it originated. And as the Global Multiplier Institute began its work, I knew that Sofia's greatest impact was still to come, measured not in her own achievements, but in the achievements of the thousands of young people who would benefit from the opportunities she was creating. The story that began with doubt had become a testament to the unlimited potential that exists when someone refuses to accept limitations and dedicates their success to expanding possibilities for others. Sofia had proven that the most powerful force for change isn't individual excellence, but individual excellence committed to multiplying itself in service of others. Sofia's Harvard Journey. Part 7. The Legacy Builders. 10 years had passed since Sofia first walked through Harvard's gates, and the ripple effects of her journey had grown into waves of transformation that were reshaping educational landscapes across 6 continents. Standing in the conference room of the Global Multiplier Institute's new headquarters in downtown Chicago, I watched my daughter lead a strategy session with 32 young leaders who represented the next generation of educational innovators. These weren't just success stories anymore. They were architects of systemic change. Dr. Amara Okafor, who had grown up in a Lagos slum and was now Nigeria's youngest university chancellor at age 29, was presenting her plan to establish a network of excellence academies across West Africa. Raj Patel, raised by a single mother in Mumbai's Dharavi district, had returned from Oxford to create India's first completely free, internationally accredited online university. Maria Gonzalez, whose farm worker parents had never attended school, was fresh from completing her PhD at Cambridge and was preparing to launch Mexico's most ambitious rural education reform initiative. Each person in that room represented thousands of hours of Sofia's direct mentorship, but more importantly, each represented thousands of other students whose lives would be transformed by the institutions and programs these leaders were creating. The multiplier effect had become a multiplier movement. The data we're seeing is unprecedented, Sofia told the group, projecting statistics that would have seemed impossible when she first started this work. Communities with Global Multiplier Institute alumni are showing average increases of 500% in university enrollment, 400% in STEM field participation, and 650% in students pursuing graduate degrees. But those numbers only tell part of the story. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a world map dotted with hundreds of colored pins. What excites me most is this. Each pin represents an institution, program, or policy that was created by someone who went through our network. We're not just changing individual lives anymore. We're changing the institutional fabric of how societies develop and support human potential. The transformation was indeed staggering. In the decade since Sofia had launched her first international programs, GMI alumni had established 47 new universities, reformed educational policies in 23 countries, created over 200 community-based learning centers, and influenced legislation that expanded educational access for millions of students worldwide. But the meeting that day wasn't focused on celebrating past achievements. Sofia had called together this particular group of leaders to discuss the most ambitious project in the Institute's history, the Global Educational Equity Accord, a binding international agreement that would commit signatory nations to specific targets for identifying and developing exceptional potential, regardless of students' socioeconomic backgrounds. The United Nations has indicated willingness to sponsor the accord, Sofia explained, but they need to see evidence that member nations are prepared to make meaningful commitments. That's where each of you comes in. The room fell silent as participants absorbed the magnitude of what Sofia was proposing. An international treaty on educational equity would represent the first time in history that nations had made legally binding commitments to systematic talent development. It would also create unprecedented opportunities for cooperation, resource sharing, and accountability in addressing global educational inequality. Dr. Chen Wei, who had transformed rural education across 3 Chinese provinces after graduating from Harvard, was the first to speak. Sofia, the scope of what you're describing would require massive coordination between governments, universities, and civil society organizations. How do we ensure that this doesn't become another well-intentioned agreement that sits unsigned in filing cabinets? Sofia's response revealed the strategic sophistication she had developed through years of working at the intersection of grassroots innovation and global policy. That's exactly why I've asked all of you here. The accord won't succeed if it's designed by diplomats and politicians. It needs to be created by people who understand how educational transformation actually happens in real communities. Over the following 3 days, the group worked 18-hour sessions to draft what would become known as the Chicago Framework, a comprehensive blueprint for how nations could systematically identify, support, and leverage exceptional potential for national development. The framework included specific metrics for measuring progress, innovative funding mechanisms that aligned international aid with educational outcomes, and accountability structures that ensured commitments translated into real-world change. But the most revolutionary aspect of the Chicago Framework was its recognition that educational equity wasn't just a social justice issue, it was an economic development strategy. The framework demonstrated, using data from Sofia's global network, that countries investing in systematic talent development saw returns of $15 for every dollar spent, measured in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. The presentation of the Chicago Framework to UN leadership 3 months later marked a watershed moment in Sofia's career and the global educational equity movement. Secretary General Antonio Guterres called it the most comprehensive and practical approach to educational development that the United Nations has ever received. More importantly, 12 nations immediately committed to pilot implementations, with another 35 expressing serious interest in full participation. The success of the framework launch led to an invitation that would test Sofia's leadership in new ways. Harvard University, recognizing her extraordinary impact on global education, offered her the position of Dean of the Graduate School of Education, making her, at 32, the youngest dean in the university's history and the first Latina to hold the position. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew Sofia's story. The institution that had once seemed impossibly out of reach was now asking her to help shape its future direction. But Sofia's response to the offer revealed how completely her perspective on success had evolved since her undergraduate days. "I'm honored by Harvard's confidence in me," she told the search committee during her interview. "But I need to be clear about what accepting this position would mean. I wouldn't be interested in simply maintaining Harvard's current reputation or making incremental improvements to existing programs." She paused, looking around the room at the distinguished faculty and administrators who would become her colleagues. "If I accept this role, it would be to transform how elite institutions think about talent identification, student support, and institutional responsibility. It would mean redefining what Harvard looks for in students and what Harvard expects of itself in terms of developing global leaders." The committee's response was unanimously enthusiastic. Harvard's president, Dr. Lawrence Bacow, later told me that Sofia's vision for institutional transformation was exactly what the university needed to remain relevant in an increasingly complex global landscape. Sofia's acceptance speech as the new dean, delivered to a packed Sanders Theater, captured the evolution of her thinking about individual achievement and institutional responsibility. 15 years ago, I sat in a guidance counselor's office and was told that Harvard wasn't for girls like me. Today, I stand before you as Harvard's new Dean of Education, responsible for training the next generation of educational leaders worldwide. But I'm not here to celebrate how far I've traveled. I'm here to talk about how far we all need to travel together. She gestured toward the audience, which included current students, faculty, alumni, and visitors from around the world. The question isn't whether institutions like Harvard can continue to attract exceptional students. The question is whether we can become exceptional at recognizing and developing potential wherever it exists. Can we transform from institutions that confirm privilege into institutions that create opportunity? Her first major initiative as dean was the launch of the Global Scholars Program, which would identify and support 200 high-potential students annually from underserved communities worldwide. But this wasn't just a scholarship program. It was a comprehensive effort to prepare these scholars to become educational innovators in their home regions upon graduation. Each global scholar would spend their first year at Harvard engaging in intensive academic preparation, cultural bridge building, and leadership development. Their second year would involve fieldwork in communities facing educational challenges, where they would design and test innovative solutions under faculty supervision. Their final year would focus on developing implementation plans for scaling their innovations in partnership with local institutions and international organizations. The program's design reflected everything Sofia had learned about sustainable change over the previous decade. Rather than simply extracting talented students from their communities and integrating them into existing systems, the Global Scholars Program was designed to create a pipeline of educational innovators who would return home with both Harvard credentials and locally relevant solutions. The selection process alone revolutionized how elite universities thought about admissions. Instead of relying primarily on standardized test scores and conventional extracurricular activities, the Global Scholars Program evaluated candidates based on their ability to identify community problems, design creative solutions, and demonstrate leadership potential in challenging circumstances. The first cohort of Global Scholars, selected from over 50,000 applications worldwide, included a teenage inventor from rural Kenya who had created solar-powered learning devices, a young woman from Afghanistan who had established underground schools for girls in her province, and a student from indigenous communities in Guatemala who had developed bilingual education programs that preserved cultural knowledge while preparing students for university success. Working with this extraordinary group of young people reminded Sofia daily of why her work mattered and where her own journey had started. During weekly mentoring sessions, she found herself sharing stories of her own moments of doubt, the importance of finding advocates and allies, and the responsibility that comes with opportunities that others had been denied. One conversation particularly moved her. Fatou Camara, a global scholar from rural Senegal who had grown up without access to books or internet, but had taught herself advanced mathematics using materials she found at a mission school, was struggling with imposter syndrome during her first semester at Harvard. Dean Hernandez, Fatou said during their one-on-one meeting, "Sometimes I look around at my classmates and feel like I don't belong here. They speak about ideas and experiences that are completely foreign to me. How do I contribute to discussions when I feel like I'm always trying to catch up?" Sofia's response drew on her own experience while acknowledging the unique challenges that each student faced. "Fatou, let me tell you something that took me years to understand. The feeling that you don't belong isn't evidence that you don't belong. It's evidence that you're brave enough to be somewhere that challenges you to grow." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more personal. "But more importantly, you're not here to become like everyone else. You're here to bring perspectives and insights that this institution has never had access to before. Your experiences growing up in rural Senegal, your creativity in learning without resources, your understanding of educational challenges that most Harvard students have never imagined. These aren't deficits you need to overcome. They're assets that Harvard needs." Over the following months, Sofia watched Fatou transform from an uncertain newcomer into one of the most influential voices in her cohort. Her senior thesis on community-based learning models would later become the foundation for Senegal's national rural education reform initiative, affecting over 100,000 students across the country. Stories like Fatou's were becoming increasingly common as the Global Scholars Program expanded and evolved. Each cohort brought new perspectives that challenged faculty assumptions, influenced curriculum development, and pushed Harvard's education school toward more globally relevant and culturally responsive approaches to educational leadership. The program's success attracted attention from universities worldwide, leading to the creation of the Global University Alliance for Educational Equity, a consortium of elite institutions committed to implementing similar programs and sharing resources for global talent development. Within 3 years, the alliance included 47 universities across 6 continents, creating an unprecedented network for identifying and supporting exceptional potential worldwide. But Sofia's most significant innovation as dean came in her 4th year, when she launched what she called the Reverse Fellowship Program. Instead of just bringing international students to Harvard, the program sent Harvard faculty and graduate students to work in educational systems across the developing world, learning from local innovations and contributing their expertise to community-driven solutions. The program challenged fundamental assumptions about the direction of knowledge transfer in international education. Rather than assuming that elite American institutions had solutions that could be exported to other contexts, the Reverse Fellowship Program recognized that innovative approaches to educational challenges were often emerging from the communities facing those challenges most directly. Dr. James Morrison, a Harvard professor who spent 6 months working with teacher training programs in rural Bangladesh, returned with insights that revolutionized his courses on educational psychology. "I went thinking I would teach," he told a faculty seminar, "but I spent most of my time learning. The innovations I witnessed in community-based learning and peer mentorship were more sophisticated than anything we were teaching in our graduate programs." These experiences began to influence Harvard's entire approach to educational research and practice. Faculty members who had spent careers studying education in theoretical contexts began engaging with practitioners who were creating real-world solutions under resource constraints. Graduate students who had focused on policy analysis began developing hands-on experience with implementation challenges. The transformation extended beyond Harvard to influence how elite institutions worldwide thought about their role in global educational development. Sofia's approach, which emphasized mutual learning, community partnership, and sustainable innovation, became a model for university engagement that respected local knowledge while contributing international expertise. As Sofia completed her 5th year as dean, the impact of her leadership was being felt at multiple levels. Harvard's education school had been transformed from a primarily theoretical program into a laboratory for practical innovation. The Global Scholars Program had produced over 800 graduates who were leading educational change initiatives in 93 countries. The Reverse Fellowship Program had created lasting partnerships between Harvard and educational institutions across the developing world. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, now 80 years old and battling health challenges, wrote Sofia a letter that arrived on the 10th anniversary of her appointment as dean. "Dear Sofia," the letter began in Mrs. Patterson's still precise handwriting, "I wanted to write while I'm still able to share clearly what your journey has meant to me and to countless others whose lives you've touched. When I first met you, I saw a smart girl from a working-class family, and I thought my job was to help you understand realistic expectations. What I couldn't see was that you were already a revolutionary, someone who would refuse to accept limitations and would spend your life ensuring that other young people never had to accept them either. Your work at Harvard and around the world has proved something I wish I had understood 50 years ago, that exceptional potential exists everywhere, and our job as educators isn't to sort students into categories of possible and impossible. Our job is to create conditions where every form of human brilliance can flourish." The letter concluded with an observation that captured the essence of Sofia's transformation and impact. "You've shown the world that the most powerful question isn't, 'Are you Harvard material?' The most powerful question is, 'How can Harvard become worthy of the potential that exists in every community?' Thank you for changing how we think about education, opportunity, and human possibility." Reading Mrs. Patterson's letter that evening, Sofia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from a small Illinois town to global leadership in educational equity. But she also recognized that the most important chapters of her story were still being written, not just in her own achievements, but in the achievements of the thousands of young people whose potential was being recognized and developed, because she had refused to accept that Harvard wasn't for girls like her. The guidance counselor's limiting comment had become the catalyst for a global movement that was transforming how societies identify, support, and leverage human potential. And as Sofia looked toward the future, she knew that her greatest legacy would be measured not in her own accomplishments, but in the unlimited possibilities that were now opening for students whose dreams had once seemed unrealistic. The story that began with doubt had become a testament to the power of one person's refusal to accept limitations, and the exponential impact that occurs when that refusal becomes a commitment to ensuring that no other talented young person ever hears that their dreams are too big for their circumstances. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.